Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. In today's video we're going to look at one of the best games that Paul Morphy has ever played. It is from the year of 1857 and it was played against Thomas Worrell. And this game features an amazing checkmate at the end of the video, and it also features material disadvantage from the beginning for Paul Morphy. So if you're interested in seeing more of this content, subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell to miss nothing in the future, and also like this video to help with the algorithm. So let's start with the video. So in this game, as I already mentioned, Paul Morphy plays without the queenside knight, and this is because Paul Morphy was one of the best players in his time, and his opponent Thomas Worrell wasn't on the playing strength as him. And it's quite common in a game of chess that if you play against a better player, that the better player, for example, plays with less material, just to make it a bit easier for the weaker player to also win some games. But let's see how this played out in this game, if Thomas Worrell was actually able to win. So the game starts off with the move e4. We have e5, and now Morphy goes for f4. And this opening is called the King's Gamut usually. It's called that way if the knight is on b1. In this case, since it's not like a typical game of chess in which both parties have the same amount of pieces, it's a bit tricky to call this an opening. It just resembles a King's Gambit in that way. So in this position, Black took the pawn on f4. This is also the usual way how the King's Gambit is played. And now knight f3 was played, just developing a piece and preparing to castle in the future. Now Worrell went for g5, just defending this pawn here in the future. Morphy went for bishop c4, just developing and preparing to castle. And now Thomas Worrell went for g4. And g4, first of all, relinquishes the defense of this pawn on f4. This becomes important in the future. And it also attacks the knight on f3. And even every beginner would play moves like, for example, knight to d4, or going maybe even back, just to don't lose this knight. But Morphy wasn't normal. He went for the move d4. And I mean, what can you say about this move? You can just see that Morphy now has the full center. So he just controls a lot of squares. So f5, e5, d5 and c5, so it's a lot of space in the center. But on the other hand, he gives up his knight for it. So we have g takes f3, getting the second knight. So now you can see that Morphy is playing without both knights, and he also has lost his f-pawn. So let's see how this game continued. So Morphy now castled. This just gets the king to safety, and you can just see that the rook becomes very powerful in that way, because these two pawns become sort of a liability, and you can just see that Black's king is uncastled. So it becomes possible in the future that rook and bishop working together, forming this nice attack towards the f7 pawn, and Black has to be very careful what to do. The next move I really like from Thomas Worrell. He played the move bishop h6. And bishop h6 is just designed to defend his pawn on f4. And you sort of have to defend f4. If you don't defend f4, your whole defense crumbles, because then, as I mentioned, this rook becomes incredibly active. In the next move, Morphy went for queen takes f3. He just recaptures the pawn that took his poor knight. So he gets his first point of material, which is very exciting if you're Paul Morphy. And in this position, Black has to be very, very careful, because, as I mentioned, this pressure here on this poor f4 pawn is just massive. And what you have to play is, for example, queen f6, or even better, queen h4, just to defend this pawn twice, because then the bishop and queen would defend this pawn. Of course, you have some pressure with rook, queen and bishop, but you don't really actually mind trading these pieces. For example, if bishop takes, you can maybe even recapture with the queen, and after queen takes, bishop takes, rook takes, you can just see that Black would happily give up this pawn just to play this game in an easier way, because then, for example, you can play knight h6, for example, and try to defend this pawn. And for example, if something like rook a to f1 comes, you can just even maybe castle, and this pawn is defended a lot of times. And I think if black just develops here naturally, you don't have anything to fear. But instead, something else was played. In this position, Thomas Worrell went for one of the worst moves in this game, and it's not that easy to find why it's a bad move. He played the move knight c6, and if you want, you can try to find the winning idea here, or the best move. It's not entirely winning, but it gives white a lot of chance to play this game in a very aggressive play. And I will give you a couple of seconds to find the move. So the move in this position that Morphy saw is the incredible bishop takes f7 with check. And this move is just designed to attack the black king in a brutal way. Because what happens now? In the game we got the move king takes f7. The best defense actually would be to play king f8, just to have one piece in front of this whole battery. But in the game we got king takes f7, and at this point black is actually losing the game. And it's so incredible just to understand that in this game it's not about the quantity of pieces, because in that regard black is obviously winning, because black just lost 2 pawns and white lost 3 minor pieces and a pawn. So materially speaking, white is doing really, really bad here. But on the other side, when you just look at the position in itself, you can see that black only has 2 minor pieces developed, so the bishop and the knight, and has this extremely weak king here on f7. And this will become the biggest problem in the position, because if your king is weak and you have this massive battery going down the board, it's hard to survive this. So the next move that Morphy played was queen h5, giving check to the king. And the only logical move here is king g7, just hiding here. And maybe in the future black hopes maybe to get the knight into the game, get the rook out, and maybe find some shelter on the h8. But this will be highly unlikely, as we will see in the game. So after king g7, Morphy took the pawn on f4. So we have bishop takes f4. Black just recaptured the bishop. We have bishop takes f4. And now we got the move rook takes f4. So Morphy won a pawn in the process, but the most important thing here is that this king is obviously very, very weak now, and we will get a lot of firepower aiming down at the king. And in this position actually you have to be really, really careful, because let's say I play a move like a6, which is a stupid move, but now there's a problem for black. And if you want, you can try to find why, for example, a move like a6 doesn't work, and maybe also you can kind of think about the move that black here has to play to survive this. And as you probably saw, black has to be very careful here, because rook f7 is actually mate. The king gets checked by the rook, and the king has no squares. So h6 is taken, g6 is taken, obviously f6 and f8 is taken, and the queen is defending the rook. So this would be checkmate. However, in the game, Thomas actually found a good defense here. He played knight h6. And knight h6 defends f7, so this rook maneuver is not possible anymore, because you can just take the rook and you just gave up one rook for nothing. So instead, Morphy just went for rook f1, a to f1. And this doubles the rooks, and it prepares some brutal chaos against the king. So in this position, Worrell went for queen e8. And I think queen e8 has 2 purposes. The first is to defend f7, so you don't have to worry about this rook maneuver here in the future. And the second cause is just to offer a queen trade. So in this position, if white would accept the queen trade, this would be a huge blunder, because after this, black can just develop in the usual way, in a normal way, and white only has 2 rooks remaining, and you can't play like this. So in this position, the move that is kind of tempting as a beginner is queen g5, just giving a check. But this is actually not that good, because now we get queen g6, and the black king is surprisingly safe here in this position. So this is why Morphy chose another retreating square, which is queen h4. Thomas Worrell went for d6, just getting some pressure in the center, opening up the bishop and preparing to develop this piece. Morphy went for queen f3 as planned, so queen f3 check, and we have king g8. Now in this position, Morphy goes for queen takes h6, so this was the whole idea of going queen f3, going for this check and getting the knight. However, black didn't really have a good choice here to save this knight. Actually, e6 was one of the best moves in this position, surprisingly. And here, Thomas Worrell went for a horrible blunder, and it's hard to see why it's a blunder. He went for bishop d7. And in this position, Morphy actually has mate in 5. It's not that easy to find, but if you want, you can try to find it, and I will give you a couple of seconds. So the mate in 5 begins with rook f8 with check. And you don't have a choice, you have to take the rook with the queen. So we would have queen takes f8. And now you don't take the queen actually. You go for queen g5. And queen g5 comes with check. So the king is in check, and again, your only legal move is to play queen g7, because you can't move the king anywhere. You can't go to f7 because, of course, the rook is defending the square, and you can't put another piece in line of king and queen. So you would have to play queen g7. After queen g7, you have this nice check here on d5. And this is why it's important that this bishop would have been developed to e6, because then this check wouldn't have been possible. But because the bishop is on d7 in this variation, the queen can give this check actually. And now your only legal move is to put a piece between queen and king. You could block with the queen, but this would be checkmate in 1. So we would get queen takes queen, and now the king is actually checkmated. So in this position you can actually just prolong the game for one more move. So bishop e6 would be the best test basically. After queen takes e6, then you would have to play queen f7, and this is of course then checkmate. So in this game, Morphy actually missed a mate in 5, which is really surprising considering that he's quite a good attacking player. But this just shows you that we are all humans in the end, and that humans also make mistakes. So instead of going for this checkmate in 5 with rook f8, Morphy moved the rook to f3. So we have rook 4 to f3, and this makes a lot of sense. You want to play rook g3 in the future, and yeah, this is sort of why Worrell went for knight e7. And knight e7 makes a lot of sense because you want to go to g6 with the knight to block any checks. For example, if you play rook g6, you can maybe block even with the knight. But Morphy saw this maneuver coming, and this is why he played h4. And h4 prepares the move h5, which controls g6 in this position. So Worrell went for the move knight g6, getting some more defense in front of the king. And now we have the move h5. h5 attacks the knight, but in this position you don't really have a good option to get out of this alive basically with your knight. So the knight sort of has to die in this position to close up the position, because if you move your knight, for example, again, then of course this is not playable. You can play rook to g3, and this will be checkmate soon. So there's nothing that you can actually do to save this knight. So this is why Thomas Worrell went for bishop g4, attacking the rook, and this is also the best move in the position. Here Morphy went for h takes g6, taking the knight. So right now you can see that, materially speaking, black is just down one minor piece, has 2 pawns and a massive attack for the compensation. So you can say that this position is actually quite good for white, but with best play, black maybe has some chances to draw this position. However, in the game, Thomas Worrell went for a horrible blunder. The best move that you can actually play here in the game is taking on f3 in this position. So you have to play bishop takes f3, and after bishop takes f3, we would get the move g7. And g7 attacks the rook in the corner. The rook can't be saved right now. So what you have to play in this position is a move like queen g6 to just prepare trading the queens. Because if you don't go for this queen g6, if you say, let's say, try to get the bishop back, for example, you don't want to lose the bishop in the next move. First of all, you can play rook f8. This is pretty good, but even better is queen f6. And queen f6 is a brutal move because you can't stop this capture on h8 with promotion to a queen in the next move. And this is of course checkmate. So this is why the best defense in this game would have been queen g6, and after pawn takes h8, promoting to a rook or queen, it really doesn't matter. King takes h8, you would get the queen trade, so queen takes g6, and after pawn takes h6, you would get, for example, rook or g takes f3, and this would be the best thing that black could hope for in this position. You can see that white would enter an endgame with one pawn up, and this is quite easy to win, I think, in my opinion. But black could have could play for something here, maybe get the rook into the game and try to hold this as long as possible. But in the game, instead of taking on f3, Thomas went for the worst continuation in the position, and I will actually go back to this position. So we're actually back to the position that I talked about previously, and here, of course, bishop takes f3 is the move to go, but Thomas Worrell went for the move h takes g6, and now it is actually mate in 3 after this move. And if you want, you can try to find the move. The concept that we saw that makes this all happen is quite the same. So it involves these two rooks and of course the queen. And if you want, you can try to find this checkmate in 3. So the mate in 3 starts with the sequence rook f8 with check. And your only legal move is now to take the rook with the queen. So you would get queen takes f8. And after queen takes f8, you would take the queen with the rook. So rook takes f8. And the only legal move that you have in this position is to take the rook with the rook, because your queen is still defending f8. So rook takes f8, and in this position you have a beautiful checkmate in 1, which was also played in the game, which is queen takes g6 checkmate. And to be honest, I played a lot of chess games in my life, I think close to 5,000 or maybe even 6,000, but I have never seen such a beautiful mate, or a mate that comes even remotely close to this. You can see that the king is sort of in his castle with the two rooks here. You have this, pointy boy, the bishop in the front, but actually none of these pieces help the king. Quite in contrary, these rooks actually help the white queen checkmate this king. So I thought this game was really, really beautiful. And if you enjoyed this game, let me know in the comments. And if you would like to, you can send me in your own games and I will analyze them on this channel here. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.